Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. I'm really glad you could join us. My Strategy episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. In this show, we're going to talk about the ambiguous leader. We're going to talk about ambiguity in the workplace. Ambiguity is the new business imperative. Blurred responsibilities, ways to control ambiguity. Could ambiguity be a good thing? And also talk about tips and tricks to deal with an ambiguous workplace. Very happy to be here with you today. For me, Saturday is a great day of the week to reflect on my strategy, and I would hope that it is for you as well. The show is growing. We're now available on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and many more digital platforms. So if you missed this episode or would like to catch up on a prior episode, you can do so there. You can find me on most social media platforms. My Twitter handle is @HawkinsJohn, or you can find me at johnmhawkins.com. So Twitter handle is @HawkinsJohn, or go to johnmhawkins.com. Just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals, because the best laid plans don't always work. Now, this week I'm looking for stories on ambiguity in your workplace. Do you have any good examples, a tip or a trick? If you send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com, that's talk@johnmhawkins.com, you can be entered into our weekly giveaway. This week we are talking about ambiguity in the workplace. We're going to talk about ambiguity, go through a definition of it, talk a little bit about how to deal with ambiguity, since it is now the new business imperative, or so we think. A lot of this is happening because business is more complex. Matrix organizations blur the lines of responsibilities. Talk a little bit about that and why ambiguity is more prevalent. We're going to talk about ways to control ambiguity and uncertainty, and how change shows up. Sometimes we get angry. When rules change, we must be adaptable. But could ambiguity be a good thing? Ambiguity makes language more impactful. There's also ways we find shortcuts between words, smaller number of hops. So could it be helping us there? Then we're going to talk a little bit about ways we can get comfortable with ambiguity. And it might be that we need to embrace it, or we need to find clarity. Well, ambiguity. So another word for ambiguity is cloudiness, vagueness, nebulous, obscureness, equivocate, hedge, shuffle, waffle. That's according to the dictionary. What are some examples? A lack of clear and exact use of words so that more than one meaning is possible. Lack of clear and exact use of words so that more than one meaning is possible. Some sentence examples are: their actions showed moral ambiguity. The ambiguity begins to disappear as more explanations are made. She chose her clothing carefully to avoid gender ambiguity. This statement has a lot of ambiguity. They found possible ambiguity in interpretation. Got an article here from your dictionary, and they say, have you ever been accused of being ambiguous? It means you're being unclear or inexact. So ambiguity is a funny thing. Sometimes people enjoy a little ambiguity because it feels like you're solving a problem. Other times they find it annoying and just want you to come out with the story. In speech and writing, however, ambiguity can be a very useful tool. In your speech, you might want to use ambiguity to make your audience consider things for themselves. In a creative writing piece, you'll be dealing with some sort of conflict, climax, and resolution. Within that story arc lies the opportunity to be a little ambiguous while setting the stage for the conclusion. They've got a couple of examples here about how we see ambiguity in everyday life. They say, let's go through some common examples. They said these will get your wheels turning. Well, first example. Marcy got the bath ready for her daughter wearing a pink tutu. So was Marcy wearing the tutu or her daughter? Well, I've certainly never tasted chicken cooked that way before. Was the chicken good or bad? Call me a taxi, please. Is the speaker asking someone to hail them a taxi or to be called a taxi? Stop trying to push the envelope. Is someone trying to push the boundaries in a current situation or literally push an envelope across the desk? I saw someone on the hill with a telescope. Did you use a telescope to see someone on the hill? Or did you see someone on the hill holding a telescope? Now, those are some common literary examples, but just imagine if you're confused by these examples, imagine what it's like in the workplace when a boss, leader, coworker gives you an instruction or is trying to communicate with you, and there is ambiguity in their sentence structure, and as a result, what is the true meaning? So now let's examine ambiguity used as a literary device in some of their favorite works. When found in literature, ambiguity is sure to be intentional, forcing the reader to contemplate a central idea. Thou still unravished bride of quietness. This example does still mean unmoving or not yet changed. More than likely, we have to read on to see what they are up to. Another example, O rose, thou art sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night, in the howling storm, has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love does thy life destroy. William Blake. Blake leaves this poem open to a wealth of varying opinions regarding the meaning of the rose, sick, worm, and bed of crimson joy. Is this poem about the flower, or is it about the loss of a loved one? And why was rose capitalized? All these examples to me about ambiguity start getting me to think about business and how sometimes we're forced to go and make business decisions. We're forced to have interactions with clients. We get instructions from our peers. We get instructions from others, but when it is ambiguous and we don't know exactly what the true meaning is, it makes it very difficult. They go on into this piece here to talk about a couple different types of ambiguity. There's the lexical ambiguity and syntactical ambiguity. Lexical ambiguity presents two or more possible meanings within a single word. It's known as symmetric ambiguity. And syntactic ambiguity presents two or more possible meanings within a sentence or phrase, which is known as structural ambiguity. When dealing with syntactic ambiguity, it's helpful to use context clues to uncover the meaning of the sentence or phrase. For example, Groucho Marx once said, "I shot an elephant in my pajamas." Did Groucho shoot an elephant in his pajamas? Or did he shoot an elephant that somehow got into his pajamas? You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about dealing with this new business imperative of ambiguity. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Today we're talking about the ambiguous leader. Right before the break, we were talking about ambiguity, the definition in life and in business. Talked a little bit about how it can be used in literature to get us to think, come to our own conclusions. This segment, I want to talk a little bit about dealing with ambiguity, which is the new business imperative, according to some. I've got an article here that talks about how to deal with ambiguity. It says, life's rich tapestry is a finely woven creation of ups and downs and twists and turns, and in this complex and changing world, it seems that we have to deal with an increasing amount of ambiguity and uncertainty. With all the added complexity that change brings, it can be challenging to navigate some of the many decisions that we're faced with on a daily basis. The author says, I suppose you could say that if life was predictable, it would be quite dull and boring. However, there are times that I am sure we would all prefer the safety net of predictability. The reality is, though, is that we cannot always choose what happens to us, and you never really know what's around the corner. The best part of being a human being is that we can choose how we respond. Ambiguity creates uncertainty, and it can turn and in turn can create stress. Feeling in control of your life is empowering. It's our attitude that we control, however, not our circumstances. So in the context of relationships, personal development, being at work, you can imagine the stress that can be created when you are faced with ambiguous situations or a leader is ambiguous. All of these things cause us to question and not really know exactly what we need to be doing, and as a result, we don't feel as much in control. So as economic volatility means that this is unrealistic to imagine that jobs are for life and illness can strike at any moment, destroying your perfectly healthy lifestyle. You can also be subject to circumstances that occur in the lives of those around you. Even the best laid plans in your world may have to have a change in direction. It says dealing with ambiguity is the new business imperative, and your ability to manage this positively and constructively is becoming an increasingly important skill in the workplace. Because ambiguity can cause stress, it is also important for your own well-being to create strategies to help you control. And that's what we're talking about today, creating strategies to deal with it. The author goes on to talk about a few ways we can handle it. Manage your inner control freak. Let go of the complete picture. Make a decision. Be agile. Be confident. Avoid crystal ball gazing. Learn stress reduction techniques and practice mindfulness. Those are some ways that we can cope with it. I think it's important for us to start thinking, though, about what our strategy is, because if we're in a place of business and ambiguity is always around us, it's important to understand why. We've got another article here by Colin Shaw. It's called Dealing with Ambiguity, also talking about the new business imperative. It says, increasingly, though, the business world isn't like that, meaning that it's not straightforward always and paint by numbers. Business today is becoming more and more complex. For example, matrixed organizations often blur the lines of responsibilities and leadership. There are many internal complexities in corporate life, and there are many more external complications. We now deal with a number of multi-channels with customers, each with their own set of priorities and responsibilities. Even the relationships you have with your competitors aren't cut and dry. There are some companies that you compete with in one market, but collaborate with in another. And yet, any single item mentioned here could change tomorrow with little warning, replaced instead with a new challenge. So are these new business models, these new operating models actually a reason why we have so much ambiguity? Do larger companies have more ambiguity involved than smaller companies? I think it's an interesting proposition, an interesting point. And if that were to be the case, then I could see how within a smaller company, you know who to go to, who owns specific departments. They have certain responsibilities. And when somebody owns something, they are ultimately accountable for it. But in a matrix organization, when you have owners of various pieces of a process, that might blur the lines. If you have a manager who's responsible for doing the resource management and focusing just on management of employees, and then another manager who's responsible for getting business and business development, and another manager who's responsible for performance plans, all of those three positions work with an employee and the same employee. From the employee perspective, do they have three managers? Are they supposed to know which manager to go to at one point? What if there is a question in the gray area? Where does that employee go to? Who does that employee go to? That's where ambiguity comes in. And Colin Shaw says, if you're like him, he's got a structured mind and he likes things in order. He likes things to be black and white. But over the years, he's slowly learned that life isn't always that. He remembers a number of years ago when he was working for a corporation and he was discussing with his boss the latest series of reorganizations. And as a result of that, he had just been promoted into senior management and was trying to understand what his responsibilities would be. And with his personality, where he liked things ordered, he wanted clear black and white, and always remembering his boss saying, looking at him and saying, Colin, in a senior position, you need to deal with ambiguity. At the same time, the feedback hurt a bit, but he reflected on that conversation and realized that his boss was 100% right. And over the years, he has learned to deal with that ambiguity. So perhaps we all are going to have to learn to deal with ambiguity in our lives. And it might not always be something we want to do, but it is something we need to learn how to do. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about ways to control ambiguity and uncertainty. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I'm very happy to be here with you and glad you are as well. Today we're talking about the ambiguous leader. Please send us your thoughts about ambiguity in the workplace. You can send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. And if you send in your ideas, you'll be entered into our weekly giveaway. Well, right before the break, we were talking about dealing with ambiguity, and ambiguity being the new business imperative. This segment, I want to transition a little bit and pivot to talk about ways to control ambiguity and uncertainty. I think we're going to find that ambiguity and learning to deal with it is a key leadership skill. I've got an article here by Sylvia Lafair. It says 5 ways to control ambiguity and uncertainty. In this fluid world of change, you either learn to surf instability or let the unsettled nature of the day drive you nuts. Here are some tips on how to be in control of confusion and change. She says, if you have a high tolerance for improvisation, you can skip this post. However, most individuals have been taught the benefit of living life with a to-do list, and this creates a strong need for a task completion before moving on to the next. Tying life up in a perfectly wrapped package with a pretty bow is very 20th century. Nowadays, you either need to learn that predictability is passé, or you pay the price. And how hard is this for me? And I would assume for you, this show is all about my strategy, coming up with plans, planning. What happens when the plans don't work? We need to have contingencies. She says the ability to improvise is an essential leadership skill. It is something you can learn at any point in your career in this rapidly changing world. Being rigid is like a death sentence. If you are an entrepreneur, you'll know this, and there's even a course in how to deal with constant change, and going to that is a must for any entrepreneur. Learning to flex and pivot to find alternatives at the drop of a hat is one of the most important attributes for your entire career. Here are some tips to develop a greater tolerance for constant change, for unexpecting the unexpected, for mid-course corrections, and more. She's talking here about leadership training and how in that leadership training it's almost like a floor map that is a puzzle to be solved. You must step on the right squares if you're the leader to find the pattern across. If you step on a wrong square, a buzzer will sound. She said once you figured out the pattern, you're obligated to get your whole team, usually 10 to 15 people across, and it's a fun challenge and not super difficult. So all these little ways that we can go about playing games to teach us the skills of what we need to do when we're in the workplace. But when you're in the workplace and dealing with it, sometimes it is frustrating and, as we learned earlier, can be stressful. She says in some cases, when change shows up, it can create anger. She says in this little drill where they were trying to get everybody across this floor, she said at some point, usually when 2/3 of the team is across, someone will step where everybody else has gone before and suddenly buzz. The buzzer sounds. Now remember, she said the whole team must cross, so when most are across with only 2 or 3 team members left on the map, it means starting over to solve the problem. How frustrating would that be? You figured out a way to solve the problem. The leader goes through and identifies the places to step. Everybody's following suit, stepping in the right places, getting across the mat. But then one of the mat pieces buzzes. It was a safe piece before, but now it's not. She says when the rules change, adaptivity is a must. She says chaos enters the room. Initially, the players think that there is an electrical malfunction with the buzzer, but there is not. There is a sense of frustration. This worked before. What are we doing wrong? Why now? Next, they begin to doubt the initial pattern was correct. Was our pattern ever correct? But it was. And finally, someone realizes the rules have changed, and they better get the new pattern in place. It becomes clear there is a need of a mid-course correction. Some continue to whine while others get busy finding the new path to success. Change can be seen as a betrayal, and even can derail a career. Well, how frustrating would that be? You're playing a game. You need to get your whole team across. The leader figures out the pattern. They're halfway through the course, and they get all their 10 to 15 people through. By the time you get up to the 10th or maybe 11th person, the 11th person steps on a square and it buzzes, and they need to start the exercise over again. Frustrating when you're playing a game. Imagine how frustrating it is when you're at work, when a paycheck depends on it, when you have to be the person who needs to deal with this change. So I think it's important for us to realize that sometimes the rules do change. Is it fair? No, but they do. Can people get angry? And do they get angry? Absolutely. Do you feel that there's been some sort of betrayal? Yes. Could this impact your career and derail your career? Absolutely. Many people's careers are impacted by this. They do give some ideas the author gives some ideas on how we can deal with this. It says stretch, do something that makes you uncomfortable, write a song, or sing a song in front of others, run a race, ride a motorcycle, swim a mile, or build a birdcage. Stop. Pick your battles and stop railing against what cannot be changed. C. Pay attention to how others handle the ambiguity and talk with them about how they learn to stay calm, cool, and collected. Center. Take time to meditate or at least take a walk in nature and let outer nature help you balance your inner thoughts. And number 5, surprise. Give a gift when least expected and watch the delight that shows up. Do this at least once a week for 6 months. Become more and more creative with your surprise gifts. Come on, you can do it. She says the best way to become a change agent and have fun with riding the constant waves of daily surprises is to invite them into your life. The more you can reroute patterns of fear and disappointment, the more you can be open to the creative process of improvisation and innovation. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about ambiguity and could it actually be a good thing? We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy. If you're just joining us, we're here today talking about the ambiguous leader. We're talking about ambiguity in the workplace. Ambiguity is the new business imperative. Blurred responsibilities, ways to control ambiguity. But could ambiguity be a good thing? And also tips and tricks to deal with ambiguity in the workplace. We'd love to get your thoughts. Glad to take your phone calls. We'll take those a little later in the show. Number is 866-451-1455. I'm sorry, 866-451-1451. That's 866-451-1451. Or you can send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. And if you send us an email, you'll be entered into the weekly giveaway, which includes a Visa gift card. So get those emails in soon. Right before the break, we were talking about ways to control ambiguity and uncertainty. This segment, I want to pivot yet again and talk about ambiguity from the perspective of, could it be a good thing for us? Got an article here by Liggy Webb. The article is The Surprising Benefits of Ambiguous Language. Now, the show is all about personal development, and we've been flip-flopping between literature and workplace ambiguity. But I think you're going to find that the one common theme here is that communication is absolutely essential for us to get along and to be productive. And that's why I feel it is important for us to go back to these literary examples. He says here, should language be as clear and precise as possible? You might think so. But it seems that vague words and mixed messages might help you communicate better. Listen, I'm going to be straight with you, she says. Well, that's what I intended. But already language has got in the way. You're not listening at all, and by straight, I could conceivably mean that I'll be standing at attention or behaving in a certain persuasion. You probably understood my meaning, of course, but surely this level of ambiguity in language is a design flaw, is it? Shouldn't language make communication as clear and precise as possible? What's the point of having words that have more than one meaning depending on the context? She says, but a growing body of research suggests there is a point to all of this. It indicates that ambiguous language is more useful for the way we communicate than it first appears. In 2012, cognitive scientists Ted Gibson and Stephen Piantadosi, it's a hard one to say, of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology pointed out that ambiguity actually makes language more efficient. Words with fewer syllables, and easier to pronounce can be reused, avoiding the need for a vast and increasingly complex vocabulary. Well, that's good news. I can forget all the big words that I was forced to learn in school. Now, Richard Soule and Lewis of the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, Spain, suggest that ambiguity is an essential part of how language works. If language were too precise and well-defined, so that every word referring to only one thing, they would be almost unusable, the researchers say, and we'd struggle to communicate ideas of any complexity. Soule and Sion came to their conclusions by exploring the way we associate words. Words evoke other words, be it through similarity, synonym, or the opposition, antonym. So take, for example, high. Makes you think low or sky, for instance. Or it might make you think drugs or royal, which are semantic links to related concepts. To map these associations, Soule and Sion turned to a pre-existing data set called WordNet, which is a semantic network where words are linked accordingly to similarly and other rules. It's possible to find paths through the network from any word to any other. And in general, there will be more than one connecting route. Take the case of the word volcano and pain. On WordNet, they have linked via pain, ease, relax, vacation, Hawaii, volcano, or pain, soothe, calm, relax, Hawaii, volcano. The previous study found it's almost always possible to find shortcuts between two words in just a small number of hops. Some social networks seem to have this character too, which is why we speak of the famous 6 degrees of separation, the idea that we can be linked to just about anyone on the planet through just 6 or so acquaintances. Networks like this, which have a well-defined mathematical properties, are known for obvious reasons as small worlds. Hard talk. Sol and Sione say this small world feature comes from the fact that some words have more than one meaning. In linguistic terms, this is polysemy. Take away polysemy, the researcher says, and the route between any pair of words chosen at randoms will be considerably longer. Again, much of this is true of our social networks, which seems to be small because we have several distinct roles or personas as professionals, parents, members of the team sports, and so on, meaning that we act as a link between quite different social groups. This property makes social networks efficient at spreading and distributing information between distinct groups. The system is easy to navigate. It says, what's more, the researchers argue that the level of ambiguity in language is just the right level to make it easy to speak and be understood. If every single word had concept on its own, then language is completely unambiguous. But the vocabulary would be so vast. The listener does not have to guess about what the speaker is saying, but the speaker has to say a lot. For example, come here might have to be said something like, I want you to come to where I am standing. At the other extreme, if the same word is used for everything, that makes it easier for the speaker. But the listener can't tell if she is being told about the weather or a rampaging bear. Because either way, communications is hard. But Sol and Sion argue that with just the right amount of ambiguity, the two can find a good trade-off. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about ways to get comfortable with ambiguity. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Very happy to be here with you today. Today we're talking about the ambiguous leader. Still love to get your thoughts via email. Send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. We've been talking about ambiguity today. Right before the break, we were talking about how ambiguity can be a good thing in language, in networks. Helps us find a smaller number of hops to get from point A to point B. We even worked in 6 degrees of separation between anyone. This segment, I want to talk a little bit about ways to get comfortable with ambiguity. And from our perspective in personal development, we look at this from a 5-step process. Number 1 is awareness. What are your vision and goals? What are you trying to achieve? Become aware of where you are. Assess and analyze. By assessing a situation and doing some analysis, you can figure out which steps to take. So how is ambiguity impacting your life? Is it a good thing? Is it a stressful thing? And strategize and plan. We all do things on a daily basis. We have courses of actions identified. We start to determine the plans and the goals that we want to have and accomplish. But as we get through those, halfway through those plans, sometimes we run into obstacles. Like the people in the leadership course running across that exercise where they stepped on a puzzle piece in a mat, which was a safe puzzle piece, but at some point the rules changed. We then want to implement our plan, which means that as we start to come up with these new tactics, we need to do them in practice. And finally, we need support and evaluation so that we can achieve change, or we can learn to deal with change. I've got an article here by Marta Harding. She says, embrace ambiguity. As we're doing our planning here, the more I think about this, we might need to just accept that things can be ambiguous, and we need to learn to accept it, embrace it. She said it's a value we take very seriously here. The phrase invites designers to go with the flow in the face of the unknown. On paper, the freedom sounds liberating, but in practice, navigating ambiguity can be a downright stressful thing. From a very young age, we're praised for knowing the right answer and on the quick. But as designers, that's almost never possible. Our job is to help create a future that is by definition uncertain, so they're forced to face ambiguity on every project. There are always times when we don't know where to go next, don't have an answer, or get stuck. So how do we deal? What are the ways to get more comfortable with the uncomfortable? She outlined some things that have helped her, which we're going to go through. She says, number 1, plan to not know. Imagine you're in a meeting surrounded by important clients when someone hits you with an unexpected hardball question. All heads turn to you. Awaiting a brilliant response, you freeze up, your mouth goes dry. You know you should have an answer, but your mind goes blank. Rather than going into a silent state of paralysis, take a deep breath and remember that you have an answer prepared for this very moment. But you just don't know it yet. Obvious sounding, sure. Easy to own up to, not so much. She said she used to be afraid, I don't know the answer yet, because I thought I'd sound ill-equipped or uninformed. After all, their clients hire us to find answers, so to not have an answer when put on the spot can make you feel disconcerting. I think it's an important lesson here. I don't know is extremely powerful. You don't have to know everything. I don't know yet. But I know who knows the answer, or I can find that answer out for you. She says, but by allowing yourself to be vulnerable, you win trust. Owning the process makes you feel more credible and someone who's calm and collected in the face of uncertainty. Because let's be honest, nobody has all the answers. Well, that's some good advice. I don't know yet. You're being vulnerable. As a result, people will trust you. Shift from should do to could. She said, let's go back to the feeling of meeting room where all eyes are on you, and you feel like you should know what to do next, but you don't. You're getting ready to go into panic mode. Oh, yes, you know the feeling. Ever since she was young, she felt the pressure to do things as they should be done, and that pressure has followed her into her adult life. She said when she first started leading projects, she thought to herself, if I were smart enough, I should be able to impress the client with my answer. If I were a great leader, I should know what to tell my team. If I were talented enough, I should know exactly what to design next. Should. It's the shoulds that block your path forward. Should suggests there is one way forward, which is a sure way to get yourself up for a creative blackout, a high-pressure situation where you must find the single, bright and shining solution, but there's no right answer. So whenever I find myself questioning what should be, I remind myself to ask what could be. So don't say, what should I do? What could I do? And what could is a springboard for generating new ideas, brainstorming options for what's next. And it takes me from the place of oppression to optimism, just by shifting the mindset. It's an interesting point. I think it plays out. What should I do versus what could I do? You open up your options. And finally, just change your context. Even when you're under pressure, anxiety around not knowing in the answer, you can find a way to creep in. There are many times she's found herself glued to the screen on the third cup of coffee, hardly stopping for a bite to eat no matter how hard she tries. It feels like she's doing nothing more than pushing pixels around the screen. How to get unstuck? She has to force herself to remember that if she's not getting anywhere, as hard as it may be to pry herself away, that stepping away from the screen and focusing on something else for a while can bring a fresh perspective. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about putting your plan in place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Today we've been talking about the ambiguous leader. This episode we're talking about ambiguity in the workplace. Is this the new business imperative? Blurred lines of responsibility. Ways to control ambiguity. Ambiguity could be a good thing. And tips and tricks to help you deal with ambiguity in the workplace. You've got till the top of the hour to get your thoughts in, so send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. And if you send us an email, you'll be entered into our weekly giveaway. And in case you missed this broadcast, you can go to iHeartRadio, Apple iTunes, or any one of the digital platforms for a replay. And if you'd like to have something covered on the show, you can also send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com or give us a call at 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. That's 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. Today we're talking about ambiguity. We talked a little bit about the ambiguity from a definitional perspective. That's a word. Ambiguity in life, ambiguity in business, and how there seem to be some parallels. We then talked a little bit about dealing with ambiguity and how it's a new business imperative. The world of business is becoming more complex. Matrixed organizations are blurring the lines of responsibilities. Leaders have fewer answers. There's multiple channels with customers. So it looks like ambiguity is the new norm in today's business world. What about controlling it? Should we control it? Can we control it? Well, we learned that improvisation is a key leadership skill. The rules might change as we're going through the game, whether it's our personal development game, life, in business. And what happens when the rules change? We get angry. We get angry because we knew the rules. We played by the rules. The rules changed. You lose, so you get angry. And these changing rules, which can happen at any point, at any time, without warning, make us feel betrayed. And if you're in an organization or a other relationship, that's not a fun feeling to be betrayed, losing trust. But the reality is, this happens in everyday life, in every situation almost. It could happen in every situation. And so maybe we need to start think about ways we could be more adaptable, if it's important to be adaptable. But we're trying to control ambiguity, are we? And uncertainty. But then we were talking about how ambiguity actually could be a good thing. Ambiguity in language makes language more important. You can find shortcuts between words. There's a smaller number of hops. The 6 degrees of separation. We learned that if we did have to go through and not be ambiguous, our vocabulary would have to increase many times what it is, which would almost be too difficult to try and memorize all of those new words. So in some respects, communication is not easy, and we know it's not easy. But people and social networks work similarly to the way language works. You can have a vast number of people on Twitter, and you have a connection to probably most anyone in the world. That's the 6 degrees of separation. So, ambiguity, I think, can be a good thing. As I thought about that, I think it's important for us to learn to get comfortable with it. Embrace ambiguity in our lives. Know that while it's not always fun to have rules change, have a little bit of uncertainty, but plan on not knowing, shift from should to could, and change the context. And breaking habits is not easy, but if we're aware and can consciously prioritize, we can do it. You've been listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We'll see you next time.